Genisys Band.
Genisys are a British rock band that formed in 1967. The band consists of their three longest-tenured members, founding members Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins, who joined in 1970. Former members Peter Gabriel, Steve Hackett and Anthony Phillips also played major roles in the band in its early years. Genisys are among the highest-selling recording artists of all time, with approximately 130 million albums sold worldwide. In the late 1960s, with the release of their first album, Genisys's music was initially regarded by the band and the fans as a pop experiment, referring to then-popular melodic pop. Then, over the course of a year, beginning with their second album in mid-1970, they quickly evolved into a progressive rock band with the incorporation of complex song structures and elaborate instrumentation. Their concerts became theatrical experiences with innovative stage design, pyrotechnics, extravagant costumes and on-stage stories. This second phase was characterized by lengthy performances such as the 23-minute Supper's Ready, and the 1974 concept album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. In the late 1970s and early 1980s the band's musical direction changed once again, becoming more pop-oriented and commercially accessible. This resulted in their first top 40 single in the US with Follow You Follow Me, their first #1 album in the United Kingdom, Duke, and their only #1 single in the United States, Invisible Touch. Genisys has undergone several personnel changes throughout its history. Stage fright forced founding member Anthony Phillips to leave the band in 1970. In 1975, Collins, then the band's drummer, replaced Peter Gabriel as lead singer after a lengthy search for a replacement. To facilitate Collins's move to lead vocals during concerts, Bill Bruford and Chester Thompson played drums for the band as they toured, with Collins joining in briefly during lengthy instrumental passages. In 1977, guitarist Steve Hackett left the band. After Phil Collins left the band in 1996, Genisys recruited Ray Wilson, formerly of Stillskin. Wilson appeared on the 1997 album Calling All Stations, after which the band announced an indefinite hiatus. In 2007, Banks, Collins and Rutherford reunited for a 20-city tour of Europe and North America, which included a free concert at Rome's Circo Massimo in front of 500,000 fans. Genisys was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010. The future of the band remains uncertain, with Collins's retirement from the music business, although he has since considered a return to music and Genisys, and the other members' solo work, but Banks indicated the band had come to an end in an interview in 2012.
History. Early years 1967–69.
Genisys formed in 1967 when Peter Gabriel and Tony Banks were students at Charterhouse School in Godalming, Surrey. Formed out of school bands Garden Wall and The Anon, Genisys's original lineup consisted of Peter Gabriel, vocals, Anthony Phillips, guitar, Tony Banks, keyboards, Mike Rutherford, bass and guitar, and Chris Stewart, drums. The group, minus Stewart, originally formed as a songwriting partnership with no intention of performing, but with more and more bands writing their own songs, there was no demand for a team of young and inexperienced songwriters. Charterhouse School alumnus Jonathan King attended a concert at Charterhouse in 1968 while the band was still in school. Following the concert, another student gave King a tape of songs the band had recorded and King thought enough of them to sign them to a recording contract. King was a songwriter and record producer who had a hit single at the time, Everyone's Gone to the Moon. King named the band Genisys, after previously suggesting the name Gabriel's Angels, recalling that he had thought it was a good name. It suggested the beginning of a new sound and a new feeling. The resulting album, From Genisys to Revelation, was released on Decca Records in March 1969. During the sessions, Stewart was replaced by John Silver on drums. The band recorded a series of songs influenced by the light pop style of the Bee Gees, one of King's favorite bands at the time. King assembled the tracks as a concept album, and added string arrangements during the production. Their first single, The Silent Sun, was released in February 1968. The album sold poorly and Genisys split with both Decca and Jonathan King. King holds the rights to the songs on the From Genesis to Revelation album and has re-released it many times under a variety of names, including In the Beginning, Where the Sour Turns to Sweet, Rock Roots, Genesis. And the Word Was and, most recently, The Genesis of Genesis. Genisys is said to have disowned the record and have been embarrassed by its re-release. Silver was replaced by John Mayhew before the recording of Trespass. Genisys then secured a new recording contract with Charisma Records. The band had built a following through live performances which featured the band's hypnotic, dark and haunting melodies. These performances also captured the interest of Charisma founder Tony Stratton Smith. Trespass, which was made from many of the songs the band had written during their earliest live shows, was the template for the band's albums in the 1970s, lengthy, sometimes operatic pieces resembling the style of progressive rock bands such as King Crimson, Yes, Camel, Hawkwind, and Gentle Giant, along with the occasional shorter, more accessible, and sometimes humorous number. Trespass included progressive rock elements such as elaborate arrangements and time signature changes, as in the 9-minute song The Knife. Ill health and recurring stage fright caused Phillips to leave the band in the summer of 1970. Phillips would later record many solo albums, sometimes in collaboration with other Genisys members. Phillips's departure traumatized Banks and Rutherford, causing the band to doubt whether it could continue. However, the remaining members decided to carry on, replacing Mayhew with Phil Collins, formerly of Flaming Youth, on drums, and Phillips first with Mick Barnard and then with Steve Hackett, formerly of Quiet World, on guitar in October 1970.
The Classic Era 1971-75.
Collins and Hackett made their studio debut in 1971 on Nursery Crime, which features the musical box, and Collins's first lead vocal performance in For Absent Friends. The song was also the first written by new members Collins and Hackett within the band. 2 engineers were hired and then quit before John Burns took over during the recording of their next album, and this began a successful 3-album collaboration between Burns and the group. On the track Seven Stones, and The Fountain of Salmaces, Banks used the mellotron that had been used in the 1969 In the Court of the Crimson King album. Also in 1971, Gabriel and Collins did work on the Colin Scott album along with an array of many other progressive rock artists. During the tour of Nursery Crime, Genisys would tour with other bands such as Lindy's Fun, Van der Graaf Generator, and String Driven Thing. The next album, Foxtrot, was released in October 1972 and contains what has been described as one of the group's most accomplished works, the 23-minute multi-part epic Supper's Ready. Songs such as the Arthur C. Clarke-inspired Watcher of the Skies solidified their reputation as songwriters and performers. Gabriel's flamboyant and theatrical stage presence, which involved numerous and elaborate costumes and surreal spoken song introductions, made the band a popular live act. During the summer of 1973, Hackett, Collins, and Rutherford had worked with progressive rock artists outside of Genisys. Collins and Hackett, along with John Wetton, worked on ex-Yes guitarist Peter Banks' first solo album, Two Sides of Peter Banks. Banks and Collins were in a jazz fusion group called Zox and the Radar Boys. Phillips, Rutherford and Collins began work on Anthony Phillips' The Geese and the Ghosts song Silver Song, Only Your Love, and Master of Time. A live album, Genisys Live, was recorded on the Foxtrot tour in 1973, shortly before the band's upcoming studio album was released. Selling England by the Pound was released in November 1973 and was well received by critics and fans. Gabriel insisted on the title, a reference to a current Labour Party slogan, in an effort to counter the impression that Genisys were becoming too US-oriented. The album contains Firth of Fifth, and I Know What I Like. These songs became part of their live repertoire, with the latter becoming their first charting single, reaching number 17 on the UK singles charts. During this period Hackett became an early user of the electric guitar tapping technique, which was later popularised by Eddie Van Halen, as well as sweep picking, which was popularized in the 1980s by Inge Malmsteen. These guitar techniques were incorporated in the song Dancing with the Moon at Night. At the same time, the band signed with new manager Tony Smith, who published all subsequent Genisys songs through his company Hit and Run Music Publishing. In 1974, Genisys recorded a double concept album The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which was released on November 18. In contrast to the lengthy tracks featured on earlier albums, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a collection of shorter tracks, connected by a number of segs. The story describes the spiritual journey of Rael, a Puerto Rican youth living in New York City, and his quest to establish his freedom and identity. During his adventure, Rael encounters several bizarre characters including the Slipperman and Alimia, the latter being borrowed from Greek mythology and influenced by a poem by Keats. Gabriel stated that Alejandro Jodorowsky's film El Topo movie was an influence in Rael's story. The band embarked on a world tour to promote the album, performing it 102 times in its entirety, with Gabriel adding spoken narration. This choice of set was soon regretted by the band members, since it lacked the variety of playing material from throughout their career and compelled them to perform songs which didn't work well live. During their live performances, Genisys pioneered the use of lasers and other light effects, most of which were built by the Dutch technician Theo Butchever. A customized handheld unit was used to channel laser light, which allowed Gabriel to sweep the audience with various light effects. Creating the ambitious The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway album strained relations between band members, particularly Banks and Gabriel, who had been good friends since they were at Charterhouse. Gabriel was the album's lyricist, except for On the Light Dies Down on Broadway, for which Banks and Rutherford wrote the lyrics as Gabriel was falling behind, while the other band members wrote the music, with the exception of Counting Out Time, and The Chamber of 32 Doors, which were written by Gabriel alone. The otherworldly, burbling, sequence synth sounds and shattering glass loops in the track The Waiting Room, as well as the vocal effects in the track The Grand Parade of Lifeless Packaging coined in ossifications, were produced by the ambient composer Brian Eno of Roxy Music. It was a bartered agreement between Gabriel and Eno that Collins help Eno on Mother Whale Eyeless off his Taking Tiger Mountain, by Strategy, album in return for his assistance on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Collins then helped Eno again in Another Green World. During the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour, Gabriel announced to his bandmates that he had decided to leave the band, citing estrangement from the other members, and the strains of his marriage and the difficult birth of his first child. Nonetheless, he saw his commitment through to the conclusion of the tour. In a letter to fans, delivered through the music press at the end of the tour, entitled Out, Angels Out, Gabriel explained that the vehicle we had built as a co-op to serve our songwriting became our master and had cooped us up inside the success we had wanted. It affected the attitudes and the spirit of the whole band. The music had not dried up and I still respect the other musicians, but our roles had set in hard. Collins later remarked that the other members were not stunned by Peter's departure because we had known about it for quite a while. The band decided to carry on without Gabriel. Gabriel's first solo album, Peter Gabriel, features the hit single Salisbury Hill, which indirectly refers to his departure from the band.
The four-man era 1976-77.
The group auditioned reportedly over 400 lead singers to find a replacement for Gabriel. Phil Collins, who had provided backing vocals, coached prospective replacements. When the band was about to record the vocals for the album, the members came to the realization that Gabriel's possible replacement just wasn't the voice they needed. Collins asked the other members if he could give it a try. As his voice fitted the already completed music, Collins quickly completed the vocals and the band was left with the decision about what to do for live shows. Even though he had successfully completed the singing for the album, he still was unsure about leaving his drum kit and coming out front to sing for concert performances for 1976's A Trick of the Tail. New producer David Henschel, who engineered Nursery Crime, gave the album a clearer-sounding production. One music historian later opined that Collins sounded more like Gabriel than Gabriel did. Collins joined jazz fusion group Brand X on their debut album Unorthodox Behavior, which would have an influence on Genisys songs Los Endos and What Gorilla. Despite the success of the album, the group remained concerned with their live shows, which now lacked Gabriel's elaborate costume changes and dramatic behavior. Since Collins required the assistance of a second drummer while he sang, Bill Rutherford, drummer for Yes and King Crimson, was hired for the 1976 tour. Their first live performance without Peter Gabriel, and the first with Collins as lead singer, was on March 26, 1976, in London, Ontario, Canada. Concert footage of this tour is shown in their 1977 concert film, Genisys, in Concert. Later that year, Genisys recorded Wind and Wuthering, the first of two albums recorded at the Relight Studios in Haarlem in the Netherlands. Released in December 1976, the album took its title from Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights, whose last lines, "Listen to the soft wind breathing through the grass," and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth, inspired the titles of the seventh and eighth tracks. For the 1977 Genisys tour, the jazz fusion trained Chester Thompson, a veteran of Weather Report and Frank Zappa, took on live drumming duties. In a lengthy interview with Robin Tolson, Collins described the selection of Thompson to partake in the role as drummer for the band. Collins's approach to Genisys shows differed from the theatrical performances of Gabriel, and his interpretations of older songs were lighter and more subtle. At the 1982 Milton Keynes reunion show, Gabriel admitted that Collins sang the songs better, though never quite like him. Guitarist Hackett had become increasingly disenchanted with the band by the time of Wind and Wuthering's release, and he felt confined. He was the first member of the band to record a solo album, 1975's Voyage of the Acolyte, with the assistance of Collins and Rutherford, and greatly enjoyed the feelings of control over the recording process that working within a group could not provide. Hackett had asked that a quarter of Wind and Wuthering be allocated to his songs, which Collins described as a dumb way to work in a band context. While Hackett was given songwriting credits on the instrumental track Unquiet Slumbers for the Sleepers. In That Quiet Earth, 11th Earl of Mar, and Inside and Out. The Hackett-Collins Blood on the Rooftops was never performed live, and his song Please Don't Touch, which appeared as the title track to his 1978 solo album Please Don't Touch with help from Chester Thompson, was rejected by the rest of the band, who opted for the shorter and catchier instrumental What Gorilla, which closed side 1. Hackett left the band in October 1977 while the band were mixing the live album Seconds Out, which was recorded during the 1976 and 1977 tours. Hackett's last studio performance with Genisys would be on the Spot the Pigeon EP.
3-man era 1978-79.
Following the departure of Hackett, Rutherford took on guitar duties in the studio and the band were getting closer to a balance of what each member provided from a creative standpoint. The group decided to continue as a trio, a fact they acknowledged in the title of the 1978 album. And Then There Were Three, the album was a further move away from lengthy progressive epics, and yielded their first American radio hit, Follow You Follow Me, whose popularity led to And Then There Were Three, being the band's first U.S. Platinum-certified album. For live performances that year, Rutherford alternated again between guitar and bass with American Daryl Stuermer, formerly guitarist with French-born violinist Jean-Luc Ponty's instrumental jazz fusion/jazz rock band. Generally, Rutherford played the guitar pieces he composed during the most recent album, but stuck with bass for all of the material recorded prior to 1978. Their 1978 World Tour took them across North America, over to Europe, back to North America, and, eventually, to their first performances in Japan at the end of 1978. As the headline act, Genisys performed their first concert at Knebworth in Hertfordshire on June 24, 1978. On July 29, 1978, the band made their second appearance at Madison Square Garden, New York. Genisys would play this venue again on all subsequent U.S. tours except for the 1992 We Can't Dance tour, where they played Giants Stadium. As the band had been recording and touring constantly since the winter of 1977-78, it was decided by Banks, Collins, and Rutherford to take the majority of 1979 off. Collins had previously informed his bandmates that he needed to attempt to save his marriage by following his wife to her new home in Vancouver. If they planned to go back into the studio, they were going to have to count him out. Banks and Rutherford responded by proposing that the band go into hiatus while he sorted out his family issues and record solo material in the meantime.
Change in sound and Breakout success 1980-84.
After his attempt to save his marriage, which ended in divorce, Collins returned to the UK in August 1979, and found himself in a holding pattern while Tony Banks worked on A Curious Feeling, with help from Chester Thompson. Mike Rutherford worked on Small Crepes Day, with help from Anthony Phillips. Banks and Rutherford also contributed material on the Shout movie soundtrack, while Hackett released Spectral Mornings. With time to spare and new equipment in his home, Collins immersed himself in the recording of home demos that would become his first solo album Face Value, released in 1981, and provide 2 songs for the upcoming Genisys project. In addition, he rejoined jazz fusion/jazz rock band Brand X for their 1979 tour, and appeared on their album Product. Phil Collins also along with Peter Gabriel did work on Robert Fripp's Exposure, and assisted Gabriel in the making of Peter Gabriel. When the 3 bandmates came back together to begin recording their next album from October to December 1979, Duke, 1980, the product was much more the result of all 3 working together equally as 3 solo acts instead of a cohesive band Genisys once was. As a result of this writing arrangement, Phil Collins's Motown and B-influenced pop songwriting was present. It had been absent from previous Genisys albums. Duke was the real transition from their 1970s progressive rock sound to the 1980s pop era. The use of a drum machine became a consistent element on subsequent Genisys albums, as well as on Collins's solo releases. The first Genisys song to feature a drum machine was the Duke track Duchess. The more commercial Duke was well received by the mainstream media, and was the band's first UK #1 album, while the tracks Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again became live performance favourites. The machines that were used to make the sound effects on Duke were also used on the Anthony Phillips album 1984 and 1981. Duke was followed by Abacab, 1981, which features a collaboration with the Earth, Wind and Fire horn section on the track No Reply at All. Most of the album's rehearsals took place at the Farm, the band's newly built studio in Surrey, and the site where all of their subsequent albums were recorded. The album used a forceful drum sound that used an effect called gated reverb, which uses a live, or artificially reverberated, sound relayed through a noise gate set, which rapidly cuts off when a particular volume threshold is reached. This results in a powerful live-sounding, yet controlled, drum ambience. The distinctive sound was first developed by Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins, and their co-producer engineer Hugh Padgham, when Collins was recording the backing track for Intruder, the first track on Peter Gabriel's 1980 album. The technique had been apparent on Phil Collins's first solo album Face Value, 1981. The gated drum sound would become an audio trademark of future Genisys and Collins albums. The Abacab tour also marked the first public appearances of the Vari-Light automated moving light system, the development of which had been paid for by the band and their management. In 1982, the band released the live double album 3 Sides Live. The US version LP contains 3 sides of live material and a side of studio material. The studio material includes the song Paperlate, which again features an Earth, Wind and Fire horn section. In the UK and the rest of Europe, the studio material was replaced by a 4th side of live recordings from previous tours. 1982 closed with a one-off performance alongside Gabriel and Hackett at the Milton Keynes Bowl, under the name Six of the Best. The concert was hastily put together to help raise money for Gabriel's WOMAD project, which at the time was suffering from considerable financial hardship. Hackett, who arrived late from South America, performed the final 2 songs of the show, I Know What I Like, In Your Wardrobe, and The Knife with his former bandmates. 1983's eponymous Genisys album became their third consecutive #1 album in the UK. The album includes the radio-friendly tracks Mama, and That's All. The track Just a Job to Do was later used as the theme song for 1985's ABC detective drama The Insiders. The final cut to hit the airwaves was Taking It All Too Hard, which in addition to being highly played on AOR radio, crossed over to soft rock radio stations and became a fixture for 20 years. The album became a worldwide success. In 1984, Peter Gabriel, Mike Rutherford, and Phil Collins contributed solo material to the Against All Odds soundtrack.
Height of popularity and Collins' departure 1985 to 1996.
Genisys' highest-selling album, Invisible Touch, was released in 1986, at the height of Collins' popularity as a solo artist. The album yielded 5 US top 5 singles, Throwing It All Away, In Too Deep, Tonight, 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 Land of Confusion, and Invisible Touch. The title track reached #1 in the United States, the only Genisys song to do so. However, it stalled at number 15 in the UK. In September 1986, Genisys performed Throwing It All Away at the 1986 MTV Video Music Awards in Los Angeles. On the last leg of the Invisible Touch tour in July 1987, Genisys became the first band to play 4 sold-out consecutive nights at Wembley Stadium, London. Genisys was the first band to use Vari-Lite technology, and the Prism sound system, all of which are now standard features of arena rock concerts. Earlier that year, Collins viewed a spoof of himself on Spitting Image, a satirical British television show which used puppets to lampoon politicians and celebrities. He was impressed with the representation, and commissioned the show's creators, Peter Fluck and Roger Law, to work on the video for the Land of Confusion single. The video was formed as an ironic commentary on the Cold War, and played on the perception that the coalition's leaders were trigger-happy with the nuclear button. In addition to puppet representations of Banks, Collins and Rutherford, the video showed Ronald Reagan dressed as Superman. At the 1987 MTV Video Music Awards it was nominated for the MTV Video of the Year, losing to Gabriel's Sledgehammer. At the 1988 Grammy Awards it won the award for Best Concept Music Video. Tonight, Tonight, Tonight was used in a Michelob commercial, as was Collins's In the Air Tonight, while In Too Deep was featured in the film Mona Lisa. The instrumental The Brazilian appeared in the animated movie When the Wind Blows, alongside a score written by Roger Waters. The Brazilian also appeared on Magnum P.I. in its entirety in the episode Unfinished Business. At the 1988 Prince's Trust concert held in the Royal Albert Hall, London, Collins and Gabriel performed together for the first time since 1982. Collins was drummer for the house band, while Gabriel performed his hit single Sledgehammer. As of September 2007, the two Genisys frontmen have not publicly played together since, although they did play together at Gabriel's wedding in 2002. After a hiatus of 5 years, Genisys reconvened for the 1991 album release We Can't Dance, Collins' last studio album with the group. The album features the hit singles Jesus He Knows Me, I Can't Dance, No Son of Mine, Hold On My Heart, Tell Me Why, and Never a Time, a US release only, as well as lengthy pieces such as Driving the Last Spike, and Fading Lights. The album, which was produced by Nick Davis, includes Since I Lost You, which Collins wrote in memory of Eric Clapton's son Connor. In 1993 it was nominated for the Brit Award for Best British Album. At the 1993 American Music Awards on January 25, Genisys won the award for Favorite Pop Rock Band, Duo, or Group. Collins left the band in March 1996. He reasoned that he felt it time to change direction in my musical life. For me now, it will be music for movies, some jazz projects, and of course my solo career. I wish the guys in Genisys all the very best in their future. We remain the best of friends.
Wilson replaces Collins and Calling All Stations 1996-98.
Rutherford and Banks decided to continue as Genisys. However, they required more than one new member, because the band had lost not only Collins, but also the live musicians, that is guitarist Daryl Stuermer and drummer Chester Thompson. Stuermer was approached, but was working with Phil Collins on his Dance Into the Light album and touring with Collins at the time, as shown in Phil Collins's Live and Loose in Paris DVD. Stuermer's last studio performance with Tony Banks would be on Banks' Strictly Incorporated album. Thompson inquired regarding the vacant drum stool, but after being refused full band membership, he ended his 19-year association with the band. He did, however, work with Steve Hackett on his Genisys Revisited album and the tour, which is shown on Hackett's The Tokyo Tapes DVD. Eventually, drumming duties were shared between the Zidkyahu, an Israeli session drummer, who had played with Hidden Persuaders, and Nick Virgilio, from the American progressive rock band Spock's Beard. The difference in their playing styles was marked. Virgilio played softer, more subtle rhythms in comparison to Zidkyahu's bombastic technique. Two singers made the final vocal auditions, ex-Stiltskin singer Ray Wilson and David Longdon. Wilson was appointed as the new lead singer of Genisys in June 1997. On the band's criteria in the search for a singer, Banks noted, "We needed someone who fits as many of the things you require as possible, being able to improvise with the kind of music we write and also someone capable of jumping in at the deep end and fronting a band." Wilson was immediately incorporated into the songwriting process, being given half a dozen songs to work on and ending up with 3 co-writing credits on the final album. 1997's album Calling All Stations sold well in Europe, while the track Congo reached number 29 in the UK. The album was not as successful in America, where it failed to reach the Billboard Top 50. During 1997 and 1998, Genisys toured across Europe. Banks, Rutherford, and Wilson were joined live by Zidkyahu and the guitarist Anthony Drennan, who previously had worked with Paul Brady and The Cause. A concert of this tour was featured in Genisys Live in Poland DVD. However, a planned American tour was cancelled due to the album's poor sales performance. Following the truncation of the Calling All Stations tour, Genisys dismissed Wilson and went on an extended hiatus, although the members remained in regular contact. In an April 2007 interview, Wilson expressed his disgust at how his dismissal was handled, saying it was like death by silence. He also said, he regretted his time spent with the band, feeling uncomfortable as a self-described working-class man with the wealthier likes of Banks and Rutherford, and also revealed one of Phil Collins's assistants told him Collins wasn't happy that they had continued.
Partial reunions and hiatus 1998 to 2005.
In 1998, Banks, Collins, Gabriel, Hackett, Phillips, Rutherford, and Silver gathered for a photo session and dinner to celebrate the release of the box set, Genisys Archive 1967-75. In 1999, the 1971-75 lineup of Banks, Collins, Gabriel, Hackett and Rutherford released a new version of the Carpet Crawlers for the Turn It On Again, the hits compilation. On September 21, 2000, Collins, Banks, and Rutherford along with Daryl Stuermer performed acoustic renditions of I Can't Dance, Invisible Touch, Follow You, Follow Me, and Turn It On Again at the Music Managers Forum, in honor of their manager Tony Smith. Gabriel attended but did not perform. Most of the original members were involved in compiling the 2 archive box sets. Acoustic versions of Afterglow, No Son of Mine, and Follow You, Follow Me were recorded for a documentary film about the band's history at this time.
Reunion and future 2006-present.
After much speculation regarding a reunion, Banks, Collins and Rutherford announced Turn It On Again, the tour on November 7, 2006. Nearly 40 years after the band first formed. The tour took place during summer 2007, and played 12 countries across Europe, followed by a second leg in North America. The trio had wanted to reunite as a 5-piece with Gabriel and Hackett for a live performance of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. While Gabriel reportedly agreed in principle to perform, he was unable to commit to a date. In an October 22, 2012 Rolling Stone interview with Steve Hackett on the 2004 Genisys meeting, Hackett stated that a person in Genisys vetoed the idea of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway being performed as a musical without anyone else's say, and that's where Peter Gabriel lost interest. Collins later observed that Peter is a little overcautious about going back to something which fundamentally is just fun. Hackett agreed to participation but decided not to without Peter. Collins, Banks, and Rutherford toured with Chester Thompson and Darrell Stuermer. The band and the producer since 1991, Nick Davis, remixed their back catalogue into 5.1 and new stereo mixes, for release in 3 batches over the course of 2007 and 2008, each comprising a third of the band's albums, from Trespass to Calling All Stations, in a box set style release. Each album is presented as a double disc set containing a multi-channel hybrid Super Audio CD, as well as a DVD video with DTS 24-bit/96K and Dolby Digital 24-bit/48K 5.1 tracks. The DVDs also include extras such as promo videos, live performances, TV appearances, tour programs and new interviews in which the band discuss the period surrounding each album. For the US and Canada pressings, the audio discs are regular CDs and not SA-CD hybrids. These remasters were released in 3 box sets, Genisys 1976-1982 in May 2007, Genisys 1983-1998 in October 2007, and Genisys 1970-1975 in November 2008, in addition to each album being released individually. Each box set contains the albums from its designated time period, as well as a bonus CD/DVD of non-album tracks. On May 12, 2007, the band were honorees at the 2nd annual VH1 Rock Honors, along with Ozzy Osbourne, Heart and ZZ Top. Genisys performed Turn It On Again, No Son of Mine, and Los Endos, which later was broadcast on VH1 in the US on May 25, 2007. On June 11, 2007 Genisys officially kicked off their 2007 Turn It On Again World Tour in Helsinki, Finland. The band performed over 50 shows in several countries including Denmark, Belgium, Germany, Poland, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada. The German show was broadcast live to several cinemas across the UK and Europe. On July 7, 2007, Genisys participated at Live Earth, a series of concerts to promote action to confront global climate change at the new Wembley Stadium in London, along with other artists including Madonna, Duran Duran and Red Hot Chili Peppers. In an August 2007 interview, Collins has stated that the recording of a new album is currently very, I repeat, very unlikely, citing a lack of both time and inspiration. However, Banks, on August 22, stated the 3 of us would be quite keen to have a go and see what happens. On October 2, Starbucks released the CD sampler Genisys, 14 from Our Past, containing 1 song from each studio album from Trespass on, except Nursery Crime. An album of the reunion tour, entitled Live Over Europe 2007 was released in November of that year. The track list features a balanced set list covering most of their career. None of the songs recorded during Ray Wilson's time with the band were featured. In addition to the aforementioned album, sound deck recordings of each show were released by the Music, a DVD of the concert on July 14, 2007 in Rome Circo Massimo, when In Rome 2007 was released on May 26. In an interview to celebrate the release of the Genisys, 1970-1975 box set, Tony Banks revealed that it is a possibility that the band may reunite with Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett. He said, "We've never said never about it, you know. I know Phil Collins would be quite happy with the idea of just playing the drums. It would be quite fun for him. Mike, Rutherford, and I are certainly happy to do it. I know Steve Hackett is keen as well. I think it'd be down to Peter Gabriel more than anyone else." However, Collins has stated in various interviews that he is unable to play the drums due to a medical ailment. "After playing drums for 50 years, I've had to stop. My vertebrae have been crashing my spinal cord because of the position I drum in. It comes from years of playing. I can't even hold the sticks properly without it being painful. I even used to tape the sticks to my hands to get through." On September 10, 2009, Collins revealed in a post on the official Genisys website that during the 2007 Turn It On Again tour, he dislocated a vertebra in his neck which has required surgery to repair. The injury and resulting recovery has made it impossible to play the drums or piano according to the article. However, Collins states that in a year's time or more this situation could change. Future plans for any Genisys reunion could hinge on Collins' ability to recover and play the drums again. On September 21, 2009, Genisys released Genisys Live 1973-2007, a box set containing remixed and remastered editions of the band's first 4 live albums. The box includes Genisys Live and Seconds Out in both stereo and 5.1 surround sound versions, and 3 sides Live and The Way We Walk in stereo-only editions. On November 23, 2009, the band released a DVD box set of live concert videos filmed between 1981 and 1992. On March 15, 2010, Genisys were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The band were inducted by Phish guitarist Trey Anastasio. Collins, Banks, Rutherford and Steve Hackett appeared at the ceremony, but Peter Gabriel did not appear due to rehearsals for his solo tour to support his new solo album Scratch My Back. Genisys did not perform at the ceremony. Phish paid tribute to them by opening the show with Watcher of the Skies, and then followed Anastasio's speech with a version of No Reply at All. In a September 2010 interview with Billboard, Collins was less than optimistic about the future of Genisys, stating, "I think Genisys are no longer. I don't foresee me doing any more Genisys shows. Not because I don't like it or don't want to. But it doesn't fit in with my life and wanting to be with the boys, and taking board the Alamo and writing a book about that. And the other stuff that I'd like to do, and that includes doing nothing as well. But also, I can't physically play the drums. I don't want to sound like a spoiled kid, like I've had my stuff and I don't want to do it anymore. But I have done it all my life, and now I'm enjoying another side of life." Citing family commitments, Collins announced on March 4, 2011 that he had ended his music career. In an interview with Rolling Stone on September 27, 2011, Peter Gabriel said that a reunion with the classic lineup is still a possibility, but hopes remain very slim, stating, "I won't say never ever, but it's in the outside department of the betting shop. If you stick with the stuff that nourishes you the most, then you'll probably be the happiest." Asked about the future of Genisys during an interview on BBC Breakfast on May 4, 2012, Tony Banks replied, "I think we probably won't do it. Phil, particularly, has sort of moved on somewhat. We did do that last tour 3 or 4 years ago as a sort of goodbye. That was the idea of it." On the same show with Steve Hackett on October 24, 2012, Steve Hackett stated, "It has been discussed and I'm always up for it." Genisys won the Lifetime Achievement Award at the inaugural Progressive Music Awards in September 2012, with Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, with Steve Hackett on hand, receiving the award on behalf of the entire band at the presentation evening on September 5, 2012. On October 22, 2012, Steve Hackett released Genisys Revisited 2, which featured 17 Genisys songs from the period of Hackett's time with Genisys. In a Rolling Stone interview with Steve Hackett about a Genisys reunion, Hackett stated, "I would say it's possible, but highly improbable. I've always been open to it. I'm not the guy who says no." In 2013, Phil Collins stated in German media that he is considering a comeback, declaring, "I have started thinking about doing new stuff." He even stated that he considers a comeback as a member of Genisys. "Maybe playing some shows again, even with Genisys. Everything is possible. We could tour in Australia and South America. We haven't been there yet." In an interview with the magazine Rolling Stone in December 2013, Peter Gabriel addressed the possibility of a Gabriel-Genisys reunion. "It's never been ruled out. I'm trying to picture a time when it would top my priorities list though. In an August 21, 2013 Rolling Stone interview with Trey Anastasio, he was hoping that Peter Gabriel would perform The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with Fish on Halloween at Atlantic City's Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Trey stated, "Peter Gabriel, we're your band." On October 29, 2013, Steve Hackett released the album Genisys Revisited, Live at Hammersmith, which features a show from the Genisys Revisited 2 tour performing all the Genisys classics. During the touring of the album in Glasgow, Ray Wilson and Steve Hackett did live versions of The Carpet Crawlers and Entangled. March 2014, Steve Hackett continues an extended tour of his Genisys Revisited 2 album and has added Genisys stage favorites such as Lily White Lilith, The Knife, and Skunk the playlist. Peter Gabriel was inducted as a solo artist into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on April 12, 2014. After the ceremony he was asked again about a possible Genisys reunion, saying, "I never say never. It really didn't happen last time. I think there's a small chance, but I don't think it's very high."
Inspiration and influences.
Genisys has taken influence from a wide range of music, ranging from classical music to mainstream rock and jazz. Classical music was an influence on Tony Banks, Anthony Phillips and Steve Hackett in particular. Gabriel and Banks were big fans of Simon and Garfunkel. Banks also drew influence from Alan Price of The Animals, whom he regarded as the first person who made me aware of the organ in a rock context. Collins has cited Buddy Rich and the jazz rock outfits the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Weather Report. He was heavily influenced by the Beatles, the band he cited as the reason he started making music, The Action. "They were big heroes of mine, especially their drummer, who I copied all the time, and the soul music of Motown, Stax Records and Atlantic Records." Hackett's formative years were also influenced by the Beatles, and he has cited I Feel Fine as one of the records he learned to play guitar from. Gabriel's early career with Genisys took influence from Nina Simone and King Crimson.
Legacy.
As a group that influenced the growth of the progressive rock genre, Genisys has been cited as an influence on a number of bands including Sound of Contact, Spock's Beard, Rush, Marillion, IQ, Pendragon, Palace, Iron Maiden, and Dream Theater. Simple Minds singer Jim Kerr's first concert was on the band's Foxtrot tour, which he described as just the most terrific gig, and in a way my life was never quite the same again. They have also been cited as an influence by alternative rock bands Elbow and Coheed and Cambria. Several Genisys tribute bands, including Reed Genesis and the Musical Box, routinely perform material from the Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins eras. Collins became the first artist to cover a Genisys song in a studio release, Behind the Lines, which he included on Face Value 1 year after the original's release. Other former members previously and subsequently performed the band's material live during their solo shows. Gabriel played The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and Back in NYC, while Hackett has performed in That Quiet Earth, Los Endos, Horizons, Firth of Fifth, and Blood on the Rooftops, among others. Hackett has performed I Know What I Like, In Your Wardrobe, on his own solo tours, and on a 1986 tour with his short-lived supergroup GTR. Rutherford has performed I Can't Dance during his tours with the Mechanics. Collins also later formed the Phil Collins Big Band, which played jazz arrangements of Genisys songs, which were That's All, Invisible Touch, Hold on My Heart, and Los Endos, renamed the Los Endos Suite, during its 1998 World Tour. Ray Wilson has covered the most Genisys songs during his solo concerts. His 2 solo live albums, Live and Life and Acoustic, feature the Genisys songs The Carpet Crawlers, Follow You Follow Me, I Can't Dance, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, No Son of Mine, Shipwrecked, and Mama. He has interpreted 2 songs from the solo careers of his 2 predecessors, In the Air Tonight, Collins, and Biko, Gabriel. Jeff Buckley reworked Back in NYC for the posthumously released 1998 Sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk. And You Will Know Us by the Trail of Dead also covered Back in NYC as a B-side in 2005. The Brazilian power metal band Angra covered Mama in 2002. The Swedish melodic death metal band In Flames covered Land of Confusion on Trigger, as did Disturbed on their 2005 album 10,000 Fists. Disco pop band Alcazar, also from Sweden, has covered parts of Land of Confusion on their song This Is the World We Live In. Dream Theater covered Turn It On Again as part of their song The Big Medley. In 2007, Simon Collins recorded his own version of Keep It Dark with the assistance of sound designer and future bandmate Dave Kurzer as a tribute to the 40th anniversary of his father's band. Collins and Kurzer met at rehearsals for Genisys' 2007 Turn It On Again tour. The duo would later form their own progressive rock band, Sound of Contact, inspired by Collins' experiences on tour with Genisys in his youth as well as Kurzer's appreciation for the band. Collins and Kurzer also provided vocals and keyboards, respectively, on Steve Hackett's 2012 album, Genisys Revisited 2. Inducting the band into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010, Trey Anastasio of Phish acclaimed Genisys as rebellious, restless and constantly striving for something more. Every musical rule and boundary was questioned and broken. It's impossible to overstate what impact this band and musical philosophy had on me as a young musician. I'm forever in their debt. Beyond purely musical ventures, the theatrical style of Genisys' 1970s concerts with Gabriel and advanced lighting of their 1980s shows have provided inspiration for Cirque du Soleil's productions. The 2004 anniversary show Midnight Sun and the arena-based touring show Delirium trace their musical and multimedia elements back to these concerts. According to Victor Pilon, co-creator and co-director of both shows, "We're not inventing anything. Genisys did it years ago. We're just using new technology."
Album cover art.
The band's album covers often incorporate complex and intricate art intended to reflect the themes explored in the music. The initial release of the band's first album, From Genesis to Revelation, used a plain black sleeve with Genisys written in a green Gothic typeface. The three subsequent album covers were developed by the popular Charisma Records graphic artist Paul Whitehead. The Foxtrot sleeve depicts a feminine figure in a red dress with the head of a fox. Whitehead has said in an interview that Jimi Hendrix's Foxy Lady was an inspiration for the character. The cover art for Selling England by the Pound was painted by Betty Swanick. Peter Gabriel saw the original drawing, called The Dream, at an exhibition and asked Swanick to modify it for use as the album cover. Most notably, Swanick added a lawnmower to the image to tie the painting to the lyrics of I Know What I Like. After Whitehead moved to Los Angeles, Genisys signed with the art collective Hypnosis, whose artists had created high-profile album covers for Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon and Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy. Hypnosis's first Genisys album cover was for The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which featured a male model, credited simply as Omar, portraying the album's protagonist Rael. Peter Gabriel has said in an interview for the 2008 box set release of The Lamb that he was not happy about the choice of model as he had vividly imagined Rael as being Puerto Rican. Through the rest of the 1970s, various Hypnosis artists heavily designed all Genisys studio albums. The Trick of the Tail cover depicts the characters from the album's songs, including the robber from Robbery, Assault and Battery, the beast from the title track, and a metaphoric image of old age reminiscing on youth from the song Ripples. And a skunk, from the song of the same name, is also featured on the rear of the cover. Beginning with Duke, Genisys albums have featured artwork designed by Bill Smith Studios. The band's highest-selling album Invisible Touch features the artwork of assorted images, which had previously designed sleeves for Simple Minds, Duran Duran and Culture Club. The We Can't Dance cover art features the work of Felicity Roma Bowers, and is reminiscent of Wind and Wuthering, now presented in hazy watercolor. The Calling All Stations and the compilation Turn It On Again, the hit sleeves were designed by Wherefore Art.
Criticism.
Early incarnations of Genisys were often targets for criticism during the 1970s. An article in Q magazine describes a 1977 Ray Lowry cartoon which depicted an arena of, either asleep, moribund, comatose fans watching a live Genisys performance, with the band's name emblazoned on a banner above the stage reading Genisys News. More specifically, some in Britain, especially supporters of the punk movement, regarded Genisys in particular, but also the genre more generally, as overtly middle class, paying particular attention to Gabriel, Banks and Rutherford's private education, and claimed that rock music was being taken away from the working class, whom they regarded as its core audience. Peter Gabriel claimed that their audience was a mixture of social classes, and that such a suggestion was a fabrication of the critics. Gabriel's theatrics were unpalatable to some of the mainstream rock audience, resulting in a cult following rather than mainstream. This was exemplified during live performances of Gabriel's last Genisys album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, during which he appeared on stage as various characters in the album's lyrics. The elaborate storyline for The Lamb proved difficult to understand and accept, and caused a bit of friction within the band. Collins later recalled that Gabriel would be in a Slipperman costume trying to get a mic anywhere near his throat, and be out of breath, all twisted up. Towards the end I felt the singing wasn't really being heard. The songs weren't really being heard. BBC Radio 1 DJ John Peel championed the band in their early years and they performed 3 sessions for him between 1970 and 1972, but he grew disillusioned with their later excesses. Peel was quoted, "I used to go and see Genisys and after about 3 minutes I'd think, oh, I wish this would stop." Conversely, the band's transition from lengthy, complex songs to more compact, simplistic, radio-friendly material was not welcomed by critics. Rolling Stone's review of "And Then There Were Three" read, "This contemptible opus is but the palest shadow of the group's earlier accomplishments. I don't feel we've bastardized the way we were," Collins remarked in an interview with Music Express. "On a generous day I'll blame me for the change, but I just think it is us growing up, listening to different things." In a 1982 interview in Sounds, Phil Collins talked about the band's reputation in the music press and claimed that he only knew of one music journalist, Hugh Fielder, who openly liked Genisys. In 1987, Los Angeles Times critic Robert Hilburn claimed, "There's something flabbergastingly insignificant about Genisys. Its themes touch on the usual subjects, various desires and disappointments in love and life, but there is scant discovery. That isn't music that documents our times or questions our assumptions, the way involving art does. Rather than bite, probe or surprise, Genisys music just lulls. No wonder it fits so perfectly into beer commercials." Hilburn expressed more admiration for the earlier version of the band, describing it as a promising, if often overly ambitious progressive rock entry, highlighted by expert musicianship and the showmanship imagination of lead singer Peter Gabriel. Reviewing Genisys 1976–1982 in Q, Andy Fife wrote, "In spite of 150 million album sales, the bottom line is that little of the band's output has aged well. There are moments of impressive songwriting, such as the tender Many Too Many, the darkly tragic Duchess, and epic One for the Vine, but little of Genisys's music transcends in the way real classics do, and that is why they will remain perennial whipping boys for decades to come." Music critic J.D. Considine wrote of the band,
Discography.
"From Genisys to Revelation, 1969, Trespass, 1970, Nursery Crime, 1971, Foxtrot, 1972, Selling England by the Pound, 1973, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, 1974, A Trick of the Tail, 1976, Wind and Wuthering, 1976, And Then There Were Three, 1978, Duke, 1980, Abacab, 1981, Genisys, 1983, Invisible Touch, 1986, We Can't Dance, 1991, Calling All Stations, 1997.
Band members' discographies.
Tony Banks discography, Bill Bradford discography, Phil Collins discography, Nick Virgilio discography, Peter Gabriel discography, Steve Hackett discography, Anthony Phillips discography, Mike Rutherford discography, Daryl Stuermer discography, Chester Thompson discography, Ray Wilson discography.